You know, there is nothing quite like the feeling of helping family when they are down on their luck. When my younger brother Marcus lost his barista job last month, I did not hesitate to offer him my spare bedroom in my two-bedroom apartment here in Denver. I thought I was doing the right thing, being the supportive older brother our parents would have wanted me to be. After all, we only had each other left after losing them in that car accident last year. I figured a few months of free rent would give Marcus the breathing room he needed to get back on his feet. Little did I know that my act of kindness was about to turn into the most frustrating and eye-opening experience of my 28 years on this planet. Before I tell you how this family favor turned my life upside down, let me know where you are watching from, and if you have ever helped a family member who ended up taking advantage, hit that like button. You are going to want to hear what happened next, because this story gets absolutely wild. Let me paint you a picture of how this whole situation started. My name is Vernon, and I work as a software engineer for a tech company downtown. I have been renting this beautiful two-bedroom apartment on the 12th floor with an amazing view of the Rocky Mountains for about 3 years now. The rent is $2,100 a month, which is pretty steep, but I love the location and the space. When you are pulling in a decent salary in tech, you can afford certain luxuries, and this place felt like home. Marcus is my little brother, 4 years younger than me, at 24. He had been working as a barista at this trendy coffee shop in the Arts District. But like so many small businesses, they had to cut staff when things got tight. Marcus has always been the creative type, always talking about finding his true calling, whether that was photography, music, or starting his own coffee roasting business. After our parents passed away in that horrible accident on Interstate 25 last winter, we became each other's only family. The grief hit us both hard, but I think Marcus took it especially rough since he had always been closer to Mom and Dad. When Marcus called me that Tuesday evening, his voice was shaky. He explained that he had been couch surfing at different friends' places for 2 weeks since losing his job, and he was running out of options. His savings account was basically empty, and he was too proud to ask for money directly. Instead, he wondered if he could crash in my spare room for just a few months while he figured things out and saved up for his own place. The way he asked with that vulnerability in his voice, that reminded me of when we were kids, there was no way I could say no. Those first few days were actually really nice. Marcus was genuinely helpful around the apartment. He would wake up early and make coffee for both of us using some fancy brewing technique he had learned at the coffee shop. He took over most of the cooking duties. And I have to admit, his pasta dishes were way better than my usual microwave meals. We would sit on the couch in the evenings, watching basketball games and talking about memories of our parents. For the first time since the funeral, it felt like we were healing together as brothers. I started thinking that maybe this living arrangement could work out well for both of us. But then, during the second week, Marcus mentioned that he had been seeing someone new. Her name was Skylar, and from the way his face lit up when he talked about her, I could tell he was really smitten. She was 22, worked at a nail salon in Cherry Creek, and had long blonde hair that she was always experimenting with different colors. At first, I thought it was sweet that Marcus had found someone who made him happy during such a difficult time in his life. Skylar started coming over in the evenings, usually arriving around 7 and leaving by 10. She seemed nice enough, always saying hello and asking how my day went. She had this bubbly personality and would compliment the apartment, saying how lucky Marcus was to have such a generous brother. I appreciated that she acknowledged my generosity, and I figured having her around a few hours each night was no big deal. My spare bedroom was Marcus's space after all, and he deserved to have some companionship. But I started noticing small changes. Marcus was doing less of the cooking and cleaning that he had promised to handle. Instead, Skylar would whip up these elaborate meals that used up ingredients I had bought for the week. She would leave her makeup bag on the bathroom counter and forget to clean the mirror after doing her hair. These were minor irritations, but they began to add up. When I mentioned it to Marcus, he just shrugged and said that Skylar was trying to help out, and I should appreciate having home-cooked meals waiting for me after work. The second month is when things really started to shift in ways I could never have anticipated. One Thursday evening, I came home from work to find Skylar's overnight bag sitting in the hallway, and when I asked Marcus about it, he casually mentioned that she was having some issues with her roommate and needed to crash with us for a few weeks. He said it like it was already decided, not like he was asking for permission. I felt that familiar knot in my stomach, the same feeling I used to get as a kid when Marcus would break something and try to cover it up. I wanted to say no immediately, but Marcus launched into this whole explanation about how Skylar's roommate had been bringing random guys home and making her uncomfortable, and how she had nowhere else to go since her family lived way out in Colorado Springs. He looked at me with those same puppy dog eyes that had gotten him out of trouble our whole lives, and he played the family card hard. He reminded me how our parents had always taught us to help people in need, and how Skylar was practically family now since they were so serious about each other. Against my better judgment, I agreed to let her stay temporarily. I emphasized the word temporarily about 5 times during our conversation, making it clear that this was a short-term solution while she figured out her living situation. Marcus promised that they would both be extra respectful of my space, and that I would barely notice she was there. That promise lasted exactly 4 days. Skylar moved in with significantly more belongings than I had expected for someone who was supposedly staying temporarily. She brought this enormous hairdryer that sounded like a jet engine every morning at 6:30. Her collection of skincare products and makeup took over the entire bathroom counter, pushing my simple face wash and toothbrush into a tiny corner. The bathroom started smelling like a mixture of coconut shampoo and some floral perfume that gave me headaches. The electricity bill was the first real shock. When I opened the envelope that month, the amount had nearly doubled. Skylar loved taking long, hot showers that lasted at least 45 minutes, and she insisted on keeping her hair styling tools plugged in constantly because unplugging them was apparently bad for the motors. When I brought this up with Marcus, he said I was being petty about money and that a few extra dollars on utilities was not a big deal for someone with my salary. But the financial aspect was just the beginning. Skylar started rearranging the common areas to suit her preferences. She moved my comfortable reading chair from its spot by the window to make room for her yoga mat and meditation cushions. My coffee table, which had been perfectly positioned for watching television, got pushed against the wall to create what she called a flow for positive energy. She brought in these scented candles that she would light during her evening yoga sessions, filling the apartment with intense lavender and patchouli smells that lingered for hours. When I tried to move my chair back to its original position, Skylar got visibly upset and told Marcus that I was not respecting her need to feel comfortable in the space. Marcus sided with her, immediately explaining to me that she was going through a difficult time and needed to feel at home somewhere. I pointed out that this was my home first, but he accused me of being inflexible and unsympathetic to someone who was vulnerable. The television situation became another source of tension. Skylar had very strong opinions about what we watched during dinner. She hated sports called action movies toxic masculinity and insisted that we needed more positive, uplifting content in our lives. She introduced us to these reality shows about people renovating tiny houses and finding love in tropical locations. When I suggested that maybe we could take turns choosing what to watch, she said that compromise meant everyone should be willing to expand their horizons, and that my preferences were not exactly growth-oriented. My groceries started disappearing at an alarming rate. I would buy ingredients for meals I had planned for the week, only to come home and find that Skylar had used them for some elaborate dish that she and Marcus shared while I was at work. When I started labeling my food with my name, Skylar told Marcus that I was being territorial and unwelcoming. Marcus confronted me about it, saying that sharing food was just what families do, and that I was acting like a stingy roommate instead of a brother. The final straw of this phase came when Skylar started inviting her friends over for what she called girls' nights. These were not quiet evenings of conversation. Her friends were loud, they took over the entire living room, and they would stay until well past midnight on weeknights. I had to wake up at 6 in the morning for work, but asking them to keep it down made me the bad guy who was trying to control everyone's social life. Marcus told me that I needed to be more social anyway, and that maybe if I joined them occasionally, I would understand how much fun they were having. Month 3 was when everything exploded in ways I never could have imagined. I had been on a business trip to Austin for a software conference, and I was exhausted when I finally got back to Denver on that Friday afternoon. I had been looking forward to dropping my bags, ordering some pizza, and just relaxing in my own space for the weekend, but when I got to my apartment door and tried to use my key, it would not turn in the lock. At first, I thought maybe the lock was just sticking because of the cold weather we had been having. I jiggled the key, tried turning it different ways, even applied some pressure with my shoulder against the door. Nothing worked. That is when it hit me that the lock had been changed entirely. I stood there in the hallway, holding my suitcase and laptop bag, completely confused and starting to get angry. I called Marcus immediately. His response was so casual that it made my blood pressure spike. He said, "Oh yeah, Skylar had been worried about security lately because there had been some break-ins in the building, so she decided to upgrade our lock to one of those high-security deadbolts. He told me to just wait in the lobby, and he would be home in about 2 hours to let me in." 2 hours to get into my own apartment, the apartment I pay rent for, the apartment where I had generously allowed him to live for free. I spent those 2 hours sitting in the lobby, watching other tenants come and go with their keys, feeling like a fool. I called my friend Jake and told him what was happening, and even he could not believe it. He kept asking me if I was sure I had not given Marcus permission to change the locks, because the alternative was so outrageous that it seemed impossible. But there I was, locked out of my own home by my little brother and his girlfriend. When Marcus finally showed up, his attitude was completely different from the grateful, apologetic brother I had been expecting. Instead of rushing to let me in and explaining what had happened, he walked slowly, checked his phone multiple times, and acted like this was a minor inconvenience rather than a major violation of boundaries. When he finally opened the door, he did not even apologize. Instead, he said that I should have called ahead to let them know I was coming home early since they had not been expecting me until Sunday. I could not believe what I was hearing. This was my apartment. I paid the rent. I had never needed to announce when I was coming home before because it was my home. But Marcus just shrugged and said that living with other people required communication and courtesy. The way he said it made it sound like I was the one being unreasonable. That is when Skylar appeared from the kitchen, holding a piece of paper that she handed to me with a bright smile. She said she had been working on something that would help all of us live together more harmoniously, and she was excited to share it with me. The paper was covered in her neat handwriting, and at the top it said House Rules in decorative letters with little hearts drawn around it. I read through the list in complete disbelief. Rule number 1 stated that all guests, including family members, needed to provide at least 24 hours notice before visiting the apartment. Rule number 2 designated the living room as off-limits after 9 p.m. because that was couple time for Marcus and Skylar. Rule number 3 required me to split the cost of groceries and utilities 50-50, even though I was the only one paying rent. Rule number 4 banned strong-smelling foods from the apartment, which basically meant I could not reheat my leftover Chinese takeout or make tuna sandwiches. Rule number 5 declared weekends as private time when guests should find other places to spend their time. When I finished reading, I looked up at both of them, waiting for the punchline or some indication that this was an elaborate joke. But they were both looking at me expectantly, like they were waiting for me to thank them for organizing our living situation so thoughtfully. Skylar asked if I had any questions about the rules and whether I thought they were fair and reasonable. I asked to speak with Marcus privately, thinking that surely he would understand how insane this situation had become. We went into his bedroom, and I closed the door behind us. I tried to stay calm, as I explained that this was my apartment, that I was doing him a huge favor by letting him stay rent-free, and that his girlfriend had no right to establish rules for how I lived in my own home. Marcus's response floored me. He said that Skylar was just trying to create some structure and boundaries that would help everyone coexist peacefully. He accused me of always needing to control everything and never considering other people's feelings. He said that Skylar just wanted to feel comfortable and secure in our space, and that my resistance to her suggestions proved that I did not really want them there. The conversation escalated quickly. Marcus told me that I had never understood what it meant to be in love, and that I was being selfish by not embracing the changes that would make his relationship work. He said that Skylar had been nothing but kind and helpful, and that most people would be grateful to have someone who cared enough to organize their living space. When I pointed out that she had changed the locks without asking me, he said that was just her being proactive about our safety. I realized in that moment that my little brother, the person I had been trying to help and protect, had completely turned against me. He was defending someone who had essentially taken over my apartment and was now dictating the terms of how I could live in it. The Marcus I grew up with would never have treated me this way, but this new version of him seemed to see me as an obstacle to his happiness rather than the brother who had opened his home when he had nowhere else to go. The next few weeks tested every ounce of patience I had left in my body. Living under Skylar's rules felt like being a stranger in my own home, but I tried to tell myself that this was temporary and that things would eventually go back to normal. I started coming home later from work just to avoid the awkward dynamics during couple time. I would grab dinner on my way home and eat it in my bedroom while watching Netflix on my laptop because the living room was apparently off limits after 9. The grocery situation became absolutely ridiculous. Skylar had very specific dietary preferences that seemed to change weekly. One week, she was on a keto diet that required expensive grass-fed beef and organic vegetables. The next week, she decided to go vegan and filled the refrigerator with specialty plant-based products that cost twice as much as regular food. But according to rule number 3, I was expected to pay for half of everything, regardless of whether I actually ate any of it. When I tried to buy my own groceries separately, Skylar made comments about how divisive that was and how families should share resources. She suggested that we create a meal planning system where she would cook for all 3 of us, but only if we all contributed equally to a grocery fund that she would manage. The way she presented it made it sound like she was doing me a favor by taking on the responsibility of meal planning, but I could see that this was really about her gaining more control over the household budget. The bathroom situation reached a breaking point when Skylar decided that my morning routine was too rushed and inconsiderate. She posted a schedule on the bathroom door that allocated specific time slots for each person. According to her system, I was allowed to use the bathroom from 6 to 6:30 in the morning. Marcus got 6:30 to 7:15, and Skylar needed from 7:15 to 8:30 for what she called her self-care routine. If anyone went over their allotted time, it would throw off the entire day for everyone else. I tried to explain that I had been getting ready for work in that bathroom for 3 years and had never had any problems with my routine. But Skylar said that compromise was about everyone adjusting their habits, not just expecting things to stay the same forever. She pointed out that she had research showing that rushed morning routines created negative energy that affected the whole household, and that structure would benefit all of us. The breaking point came on a Saturday morning when I woke up early to go for a run before meeting my friend Jake for breakfast. I needed to shower and get ready, but it was during Skylar's designated bathroom time. When I knocked on the door to ask if I could quickly brush my teeth, she called out that she was in the middle of a face mask treatment that could not be interrupted. She suggested that I could use the kitchen sink for my teeth and shower later during my designated evening slot. Standing there in my own hallway, being told I could not use my own bathroom because it would disrupt someone else's beauty routine, I finally understood how completely upside down this situation had become. I was paying full rent to live like a guest in my own home, following rules created by someone who was supposed to be temporarily staying in my spare room. The generosity I had shown my brother had been twisted into an expectation that I should accommodate whatever his girlfriend wanted. That afternoon, while Marcus and Skylar were out at the farmer's market, I sat in my living room and really looked around at what my space had become. The furniture was arranged according to Skylar's feng shui principles. The walls had inspirational quotes that she had printed and framed. The coffee table was covered with her wellness magazines and essential oil diffusers. My sports memorabilia had been moved to my bedroom because Skylar said it created masculine energy that was not balanced with feminine energy. I realized that I was living like a tenant in my own apartment and that my brother had allowed his girlfriend to essentially take over my home while I continued to pay all the bills. The worst part was that they both seemed to think this was perfectly reasonable and that any objection I raised was evidence of my inability to live harmoniously with other people. That Sunday night, I made a decision that would change everything. I spent hours researching tenant rights and lease agreements, and I discovered that since only my name was on the lease, I had the legal right to determine who could and could not live in the apartment. Marcus and Skylar were what the law called unauthorized occupants, and I could ask them to leave with proper notice. But before I went the legal route, I decided to give them one final opportunity to return to our original agreement. I called my friend Jake and asked him to come over the next evening as a witness because I had a feeling this conversation was not going to go smoothly. Jake had known Marcus since we were teenagers, and he could hardly believe the stories I had been telling him about what was happening in my apartment. Monday evening, I asked Marcus and Skylar to sit down with me for what I called a family meeting. I had prepared what I wanted to say, and I was determined to stay calm and reasonable, even though my heart was pounding with anxiety about the confrontation I knew was coming. I started by acknowledging that we had all been adjusting to living together, and that some growing pains were normal when people shared space. But then I explained that the current situation was not working for me and that we needed to return to the original agreement Marcus and I had made. I said that Skylar was welcome to visit during reasonable hours, but that she could not continue living in the apartment full-time without contributing to rent. Skylar's reaction was immediate and explosive. She accused me of being sexist and controlling, saying that I obviously had issues with strong women who were not afraid to speak up for themselves. She said that she had been nothing but helpful and considerate, and that any reasonable person would appreciate having someone who cared enough to organize their chaotic lifestyle. Marcus jumped in to defend her, saying that I was being impossible, and that most people would be grateful to have Skylar's positive influence in their lives. He accused me of being jealous of their relationship and of trying to sabotage his happiness because I was lonely and bitter. He said that our parents would be ashamed of how selfishly I was acting toward family. That comment about our parents hit me like a physical blow, but it also crystallized something important for me. Our parents had taught us to be kind and generous, but they had also taught us to stand up for ourselves and not let people take advantage of our goodness. They would have been proud of me for helping Marcus when he needed it, but they also would have expected him to show gratitude and respect in return. I took a deep breath and delivered my ultimatum. I gave them exactly 1 week to decide whether Skylar would find her own place and Marcus would return to our original agreement or whether both of them would move out together. I explained that I was not trying to break up their relationship or control their lives, but that I was not going to continue living as a guest in my own home. Skylar stood up and said that they had already built a life in this apartment and that I could not just kick them out because I was having control issues. She said that any court would see that they had established residency and that I was trying to illegally evict them. Marcus nodded along, saying that I could not force them to leave just because I did not like having other people around. That is when I pulled out the lease agreement and the research I had done about tenant rights. I calmly explained that since only my name was on the lease and they had never signed any rental agreement or paid any rent. They had no legal right to stay in the apartment. I showed them the section of Colorado tenant law that clearly stated my rights as the sole leaseholder. The room went completely silent. Jake, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, later told me that he could see the exact moment when Skylar realized that her power play had backfired. Marcus looked confused and hurt, like he could not understand how his big brother had suddenly become the enemy in his love story. The next 3 days were incredibly tense, but I held firm to my decision. I had spent too many years being the accommodating older brother, always bending over backwards to keep peace and make everyone else happy. This situation had taught me that there is a difference between being generous and being a doormat, and I was done being stepped on by people who were supposed to care about me. Marcus tried every manipulation tactic he could think of. He brought up our childhood, reminded me of promises we had made to each other after our parents died, and even suggested that I was having some kind of mental health crisis that was making me act irrationally. Skylar alternated between tears and anger, sometimes apologizing for overstepping boundaries, and other times accusing me of ruining their relationship out of spite. But I had finally seen the situation clearly. This was not about helping family or being kind to someone in need. This had become about two people who felt entitled to live in my space on their terms, while I paid for the privilege of being treated like an unwelcome guest. My generosity had been exploited, my boundaries had been ignored, and my own brother had chosen his girlfriend's comfort over any consideration for my feelings or rights. On Thursday morning, I woke up to find that they had packed their belongings and left without saying goodbye. There was no note, no acknowledgement of the 3 months I had provided free housing, and no apology for how the situation had deteriorated. Marcus left his key on the kitchen counter, and that was the only indication that he had ever been there. The silence in the apartment was deafening at first. I walked through the rooms, seeing how they had left things. Skylar had taken her decorations and furniture arrangements with her, but she had not bothered to put my things back where they belonged. The bathroom was a mess of hair dye stains and empty product bottles. The refrigerator was full of expensive organic food that I would never eat. For the first few days, I felt this strange mixture of relief and sadness. I was glad to have my space back, but I was also mourning the loss of the relationship I had thought I had with my brother. I kept expecting him to call and apologize, or at least to explain his perspective on what had happened. But my phone stayed silent. Slowly, I began to reclaim my apartment and my peace of mind. I moved my chair back to its spot by the window and spent Saturday mornings reading there with my coffee, something I had not been able to do in months. I cooked the foods I actually wanted to eat and watched the sports games I had missed. I invited Jake over for pizza and beer without having to worry about disturbing anyone's meditation time or couple time. More importantly, I started to understand something fundamental about relationships and boundaries. Being kind and generous does not mean allowing people to walk all over you. Love and family loyalty should not require you to sacrifice your own comfort and dignity in your own home. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's entitled behavior, even when that someone is family. I learned that there is a difference between helping someone who is struggling and allowing someone to exploit your kindness. Marcus had been struggling when he first moved in, and I was right to help him. But somewhere along the way, the help had turned into entitlement, and my kindness had been mistaken for weakness. Setting boundaries was not about being mean or selfish. It was about maintaining mutual respect and preventing resentment from poisoning our relationship permanently. 3 months later, Marcus finally called me. He did not apologize directly, but he said that he and Skylar had found their own place and that he understood now how stressful it must have been for me to have extra people in my space. He said that maybe we could grab coffee sometime and talk about things. I agreed because he is still my brother, but I also made it clear that any future relationship between us would need to be based on mutual respect and clear boundaries. The experience taught me that protecting your own well-being is not selfish. It is necessary. When you allow people to disrespect your boundaries, you are not helping them become better people. You are actually enabling them to continue patterns of behavior that will hurt them in future relationships. By standing up for myself, I was teaching Marcus a lesson that his parents or his girlfriend never could, that real relationships require consideration and respect from both sides. Sometimes the most difficult conversations are the ones that save relationships rather than destroy them. Sometimes saying no is the kindest thing you can do, both for yourself and for the people you love. And sometimes the best way to show someone you care about them is to refuse to let them treat you badly, even when they do not understand why you are drawing those lines. Looking back now, I am grateful for what happened, as painful as it was at the time. It taught me to value myself enough to demand the respect I deserved, and it showed me the difference between unconditional love and unconditional tolerance. Love does not require you to accept unacceptable behavior. It requires you to care enough about both yourself and the other person to insist on something better. Have you ever been in a situation where your kindness was taken for granted, or where you had to choose between keeping the peace and standing up for yourself? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more real-life stories about family relationships and finding the courage to set boundaries. Share this with someone who might need to hear that it is okay to protect their own peace, even when it is difficult. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that your kindness is valuable, but so are you. Take care of yourselves out there.